He's standing at the sink, hands in soapy water, washing dishes he didn't use. And somehow, in the way he's doing it, he's making everything worse. Not because washing dishes is wrong, but because of what happens after. The heavy sigh, the pointed glance, the casual mention 3 hours later about how tired his hands are. He thinks he's being helpful. She's losing respect with every passive-aggressive scrub. Psychology has mapped these moments with brutal precision, the exact behaviors that make people's perception of you shift from respect to something colder. And the uncomfortable truth? Most of us perform at least 3 of them daily without noticing. Respect isn't lost in dramatic betrayals. It evaporates in small actions we consider harmless. The way you apologize, how you treat a waiter, what you say when someone else is talking. These micro-behaviors send signals your conscious mind doesn't register, but everyone else's does. In this video, you'll discover 6 psychology-backed actions that destroy respect faster than you can rebuild it. Not theories, not opinions. Patterns observed across thousands of human interactions, measured in labs, validated in real life. Because you might be losing respect right now at this exact moment and have no idea it's happening. Action 1. The martyr at the kitchen sink. Water runs. Dishes clink against the metal basin. And somewhere in that ordinary act, something toxic is brewing that has nothing to do with soap or grime. You've seen this person. Maybe you've been this person. They do something helpful, something genuinely useful, but they can't just do it. They need you to know. Need you to notice. Need you to acknowledge the sacrifice they're making on your behalf. The dishes get clean, but the air gets heavy with unspoken debt. Psychologists call this transactional kindness, and it's one of the fastest ways to drain respect from any relationship. When you do something good but immediately attach invisible price tags to it, you're not being kind. You're negotiating, and people can smell negotiation disguised as generosity from across the room. Research from Stanford's psychology department tracked couples over 5 years, measuring what they called recognition-seeking behaviors. These are the actions people take while simultaneously broadcasting their virtue. Washing dishes with a sigh, picking up groceries and mentioning it 3 times, doing a favor and then later bringing it up during an argument like it's ammunition. The findings were stark. Partners who exhibited high levels of recognition-seeking behavior experienced 37% drops in perceived respect over the study period. Not because they were doing bad things, because the way they did good things made the good things feel manipulative. Here's what happens in the brain of the person watching you wash those dishes with performative exhaustion. Their anterior cingulate cortex activates. That's the region associated with detecting social violations and incongruence. Your words say, "I'm happy to help," but your body language screams, "You owe me." That mismatch triggers suspicion. And once suspicion enters, respect exits, because respect requires authenticity. It needs to believe that your actions match your intentions. When those things don't align, when there's a gap between what you do and why you do it, trust corrodes. Think about the last time someone did you a favor and then wouldn't let you forget it. How did that feel? Did it make you grateful or resentful? Did you respect them more or less? The answer is always less, even when you're genuinely appreciative of what they did. Because humans have highly tuned social sensors. We evolved in small groups where detecting manipulators was survival critical. Someone who helps you but keeps score is dangerous. They're building leverage, collecting debts. And some part of your brain knows this even when you're trying to be gracious about it. The antidote isn't to stop helping. It's to help and then shut up about it. Do the dishes because they need doing, not because you need recognition. Pick up the groceries because it's practical, not because you're collecting moral currency. When you perform kindness without announcement, something interesting happens. People notice anyway. But they notice differently. They see someone who contributes without neediness, someone secure enough to give without requiring immediate validation. And that security is magnetic. Studies on social perception show that people who help quietly are rated as more competent, more trustworthy, and more respectable than people who help loudly. Not because the help is better, because the motivation appears purer. There's also a class element worth examining. People who genuinely come from positions of power or security rarely announce their contributions. They don't need to. Their status is established. But people who feel insecure about their value often overcompensate by making sure everyone sees how valuable they are. And that overcompensation broadcasts insecurity louder than words ever could. So next time you're at that sink, or taking out the trash, or staying late at work, or doing anything that could be framed as sacrifice, do it and say nothing. Not because you're being modest, because you're being genuine. And genuine behavior that doesn't seek reward, is what builds lasting respect. The dishes will still get clean, but the relationship stays clean too. That same principle applies internally. A calm, disciplined mind doesn't announce itself. It simply works better. When internal noise drops, actions become cleaner, intentions clearer, and presence more solid. And if you want to help your mind function with more clarity and less internal interference, take a look at the brain song. It's a science-based method designed to pull the brain out of mental overload and restore real focus in just 12 minutes a day. You'll find the link in the first pinned comment. Action 2. Speaking when silence holds power. The meeting room goes quiet. Someone just asked a question that requires thought, and before 3 seconds pass, you're already talking. Not because you have the answer, because you can't tolerate the silence. Psychologists have identified what they call silence anxiety as one of the most reliable predictors of low social intelligence. It's the compulsion to fill every gap in conversation, to ensure no moment goes unoccupied by sound. And nothing broadcasts insecurity faster than a mouth that can't stay closed. Silence is powerful. It creates space for thinking, for processing, for others to contribute. But it also creates discomfort, and people with fragile egos experience that discomfort as threat. So they talk, and talk, and talk, mistaking volume for value. Research from Princeton analyzed thousands of recorded business meetings. They found that people who spoke most frequently were rated as less competent by their peers, even when the content of their speech was identical to those who spoke less. The frequency itself became a negative signal. It communicated desperation for attention rather than confidence in contribution. Your brain processes silence differently than noise. When someone stops talking, your auditory cortex doesn't just rest. It anticipates, prepares, expects meaning to emerge from the void. And when that void gets filled with trivial commentary or nervous rambling, the anticipation curdles into annoyance. Think about the people you respect most. How do they handle silence? They let it breathe. They pause before responding. They seem comfortable in the gaps between words. That comfort signals something deep. They're not performing for approval. They're thinking for accuracy. But most people treat conversation like a competitive sport where the winner is whoever talks longest. They interrupt, overlap, finish other people's sentences, not because they're excited or engaged, but because they're terrified of becoming invisible. And in trying to stay visible, they become forgettable. Brain imaging studies show that when someone speaks immediately after a question without pausing, listeners' engagement drops measurably. The brain essentially says, "This person didn't think about their answer, so I don't need to think about it either." But when someone pauses, considers, then speaks, attention sharpens. The brain prepares for something worth processing. There's also a dominance dynamic at play. In animal behavior studies, low-status individuals make more noise. They're constantly vocalizing to remind the group they exist. High-status individuals are quieter. They don't need constant confirmation of their presence. Everyone already knows they're there. Humans aren't different. When you can't stop talking, you're signaling low status. When you speak only when you have something worth saying, you're signaling the opposite. Try this experiment tomorrow. In your next conversation, count to 3 before responding to any question. 3 full seconds. It'll feel eternal. Your anxiety will spike. You'll want to jump in early. Don't. Let the silence sit there. Then speak. You'll notice something immediately. People lean in, they listen harder, because you've trained them to expect that when you do speak, it's worth hearing. You're not filling air, you're adding value. The paradox is beautiful. Talk less, get heard more. Fill fewer silences, command more attention. Speak only when necessary. Become someone whose words carry weight. Most people never learn this because they're too busy broadcasting to receive feedback. They're so focused on their next sentence, they miss the glazed eyes, the subtle shifts away, the checks of phones, all the nonverbal signals that say, "You're losing us." But silence? Silence forces you to pay attention, to read the room, to notice when your contribution is wanted versus when you're just adding noise to noise. There's a reason the wisest people in most cultures are described as quiet, not because they don't have things to say, because they understand that words lose power through overuse, that scarcity creates value, that sometimes the most intelligent response is no response at all. So practice shutting up, not as a strategy, as a skill. Learn to be comfortable in silence. Let others fill the space. Watch what happens when you stop performing and start observing. You'll notice people treating your words differently, waiting for them, remembering them, respecting them, because you finally gave them a reason to. For action 3, agreeing your way to invisibility. Every opinion offered, you nod. Every idea presented, you support. Every debate that emerges, you somehow find yourself on all sides simultaneously. And with each agreement, you become less substantial, less real, less worth respecting. The psychology here is counterintuitive. We're taught that being agreeable makes us likable, that saying yes builds relationships, that supporting others creates bonds. And there's truth in that. But there's a cliff edge most people walk right off. When you agree with everything, you agree with nothing. You become a mirror instead of a person. And nobody respects mirrors. Research from the University of Michigan studied what they called social chameleons, people who adapt their opinions to match whoever they're talking to. These individuals were initially rated as more likable in short interactions. People enjoyed talking to someone who validated their views. But over time, respect collapsed. 6 months into the study, social chameleons were rated as less trustworthy, less competent, and less worthy of respect than people who occasionally disagreed. The researchers concluded that humans need friction to assess character. Without it, there's nothing solid to grip, just smooth, slippery agreeableness that ultimately feels fake. Your brain uses disagreement as a calibration tool. When someone pushes back on your ideas, you learn where they stand, what they value, what they believe. That information builds a mental model of who they are. But when someone agrees constantly, the model stays empty. There's no data, no substance, just a yes-man-shaped void. And voids don't get promoted, don't get trusted with important decisions, don't get respected. Think about the people in your life you respect most deeply. How often do they disagree with you? Probably more than people you merely like, because disagreement demonstrates independent thought. It shows someone processing information through their own filter rather than just reflecting yours back. There's a fear underneath constant agreement, fear of conflict, fear of being disliked, fear that if you express a contrary opinion, people will reject you, and sometimes they will. But rejection based on honest disagreement is information. It tells you who can handle you being real. Constant agreement is a trap. It feels safe in the moment. Everyone smiles, nobody fights. But you're trading short-term comfort for long-term respect. And that trade is never worth it. Brain studies using fMRI show that when people encounter someone who agrees with them constantly, activity in the medial prefrontal cortex decreases. That's the region associated with thinking about other people as complex individuals. Essentially, the brain stops treating the agreeable person as fully human. They become more like a pleasant object, nice to have around, not someone to respect. There's also a competence signal embedded in disagreement. When you push back on an idea, you're demonstrating that you've thought about it deeply enough to find flaws, that you have standards, that you're not just passively absorbing whatever gets thrown at you. People who never disagree seem intellectually lazy, like they're not actually engaging with ideas, just nodding along to avoid the work of critical thinking. But disagreement requires calibration. There's a difference between productive pushback and contrarian performance. Some people disagree with everything because they've learned it gets them attention. That's just as bad as agreeing with everything. It's still performance, still fake. Real disagreement comes from genuine differences in values, experiences, or analysis. It's not strategic, it's honest. And honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, builds respect in ways agreeableness never can. Try this. Next time you're in a conversation where someone says something you don't fully agree with, say so. Not aggressively. Not to prove them wrong. Just honestly. I see it differently, or my experience has been the opposite, or I'm not sure I agree with that. Watch what happens. Some people will get defensive. That's data about them, not you. But many will lean in, ask why, want to understand your perspective. And in that moment of genuine exchange, respect grows. Because you've revealed something real. A belief. A boundary. A brain that's actually functioning independently. And that's infinitely more valuable than being liked by people who don't know who you actually are. Action 4. How you treat people who can't fight back. The waiter brings the wrong order. Your food is cold. The service has been slow all night, and right here in how you handle this minor inconvenience, your character gets measured. Most people think character reveals itself in crisis. Big moments, important decisions. But psychologists have found something different. Character shows up most clearly in how you treat people who have no power over you. The waiter can't fight back without risking their job. The janitor can't tell you to pick up your own trash. The customer service representative on the phone can't hang up no matter how you speak to them. And in that power imbalance, your real self emerges. Studies on social perception consistently show that people form their deepest judgments about your character by watching how you treat service workers. Not your boss, not your peers, the people serving you food, cleaning your building, checking you out at the register. Because kindness to superiors is strategy. Kindness to equals is social maintenance. But kindness to people who can't benefit you? That's character. Brain imaging research from Yale showed something fascinating. When observers watch someone being rude to a waiter, their amygdala activated. That's the threat detection center. On a subconscious level, rudeness to service workers registers as danger. The observer's brain essentially thinks, if they treat people like this when they have power, how will they treat me if circumstances shift? And that threat assessment obliterates respect instantly. Think about someone you know who's rude to waiters but charming to bosses. Do you respect them? Or do you just tolerate them because you have to? The answer reveals everything about how this behavior affects perception. There's also a class consciousness embedded here. How you treat service workers broadcasts your beliefs about human value. When you're dismissive or rude, you're communicating that you see people as tools, means to ends, ranked in a hierarchy where some deserve respect and others don't. And people who think hierarchically about human value are always dangerous. Because hierarchies shift. Today you're above someone. Tomorrow they might be above you. And if respect is conditional on position rather than inherent to personhood, nobody is ever safe. The opposite is equally powerful. When someone treats every person with the same baseline dignity regardless of position, it signals security. They're not performing status. They're being human, and that humanity is what respect is built on. Research on leadership perception shows that managers who treat subordinates poorly are rated by everyone as less competent, even by their own superiors. Not because poor treatment affects work quality directly, but because it reveals something about judgment and emotional control. If you can't manage your behavior towards someone who serves you coffee, why would anyone trust you to manage a crisis? If you lose composure over a delayed order, how will you handle actual pressure? The behavior cascades. It tells stories about who you are when nobody's watching, about what happens when you're frustrated or tired, about where your compassion ends and your entitlement begins. And all of this gets assessed in seconds. Someone watches you snap at a cashier, and their entire mental model of you shifts. You might be brilliant at your job, charming in meetings, beloved by friends. But that one interaction rewrites everything, because people believe behavior under stress more than behavior under control. They trust what you do when you're irritated more than what you do when you're trying to impress. So pay attention tomorrow. Notice how you speak to the barista, how you respond when service is slow, whether you say thank you to the person who holds the door. These aren't minor courtesies. They're character tests you're taking continuously, and everyone around you is grading them. The beautiful thing is that this is entirely within your control. You can't always control outcomes, can't always be successful or impressive, but you can always be decent, can always treat people like they matter, can always remember that the person across from you is exactly as human as you are. Do that consistently and respect follows. Not because you're performing goodness, because you actually are good, and people can tell the difference. Action 5. The apology that destroys everything. You messed up, said something wrong, hurt someone's feelings. And now comes the moment where you can either rebuild trust or demolish what's left of it. Most people choose demolition without realizing it. I'm sorry you felt that way. 6 words that sound like an apology but function as an insult. 6 words that have destroyed more relationships than honest cruelty ever could, because at least cruelty is honest. Psychologists call these non-apologies, and they've mapped exactly how they damage perception. When you apologize for someone's feelings instead of your actions, you're doing something insidious. You're shifting blame while maintaining the appearance of taking responsibility. Your words say, "I'm apologizing," but your meaning says you're overreacting. Research from the University of Waterloo studied different apology styles and their effects on relationship repair. Non-apologies not only failed to restore trust, they actively decreased it. People who received "I'm sorry you felt hurt" reported lower respect for the apologizer than people who received no apology at all. The no apology group at least understood where they stood. The non-apology group felt gaslit, manipulated, insulted while being told they were being apologized to. Here's what happens in the brain when you hear a non-apology. Your anterior insula activates. That's the region associated with disgust. Not anger. Disgust. The same neural pathway that fires when you encounter something rotten or contaminated. Because non-apologies are contaminated communication. They look clean on the surface, but they're spoiled underneath. And your brain reacts to that incongruence with visceral rejection. Real apologies have a structure. They acknowledge the specific action, take ownership of the impact, make no excuses. I said something cruel. It hurt you. That was wrong. I'm sorry. 12 words. All of them focused on what you did, not how they reacted. But most people can't do this. Their ego won't allow it. Admitting specific wrongdoing feels like carving out a piece of themselves and handing it over. So they find ways to apologize without actually apologizing. I'm sorry if I offended you. The word "if" is poison. It suggests maybe you didn't actually do anything wrong. Maybe they're just sensitive. Maybe this is their problem, not yours. I'm sorry, but you have to understand. The moment "but" enters an apology, everything before it becomes worthless. You're not apologizing, you're justifying, explaining why your behavior was actually reasonable given the circumstances, which means you're not sorry at all. Studies on conflict resolution show that apologies with qualifiers extend conflicts rather than resolve them. They keep the wound open. The person who was hurt doesn't feel heard. They feel dismissed. And dismissal breeds resentment that metastasizes over time. There's also a power dynamic in non-apologies that most people miss. When you apologize for someone's feelings instead of your actions, you're positioning yourself as the judge of appropriate emotional responses. You're saying, "I'm the reasonable one here and you're the one who overreacted." That positioning is fundamentally disrespectful. It places you above them in some imaginary hierarchy of rationality. And hierarchies built on dismissing other people's experiences don't last. They collapse under the weight of accumulated resentment. The fix is simple, but ego-crushing. When you apologize, make it about you, your action, your mistake, your responsibility. Stop managing how the other person should feel and start owning what you did. I was dismissive of your idea in the meeting. That was disrespectful. I'm sorry. Done. No qualifiers, no explanations, just clean acknowledgement and genuine regret. What happens next is up to them. Maybe they forgive you, maybe they don't. But you've done the only thing that has a chance of rebuilding respect. You've been honest about your failure. Brain research on trust repair shows that people can forgive almost anything if the apology is genuine. But they can't forgive non-apologies. Because non-apologies aren't asking for forgiveness, they're demanding it while refusing to earn it. So next time you need to apologize, check your words before you speak them. Are you taking ownership or deflecting? Are you focusing on your actions or their reactions? Are you actually sorry or just sorry you got caught? The difference determines everything. Real apologies rebuild. Fake ones destroy what's left. And if you can't apologize genuinely, don't apologize at all. Silence is more respectful than manipulation dressed up as remorse. Action 6. Making every story about you. Your friend is telling a story. 30 seconds in, you interrupt. That reminds me of when I... And just like that, their story becomes the opening act for yours. You think you're relating, building connection through shared experience. But what you're actually doing is hijacking. And every time you do it, respect drains a little more. Psychologists call this conversational narcissism, and it's epidemic. Most people don't even realize they're doing it because they've confused empathy with equivalency. They think that sharing their similar experience shows they understand. But understanding doesn't require taking the spotlight. It requires holding space. Research from Harvard's psychology department analyzed thousands of conversations, coding for what they called shift responses versus support responses. Shift responses redirect attention to yourself. Support responses keep attention on the other person. People who used shift responses more than 60% of the time were rated as significantly less likable and less trustworthy by conversation partners, even when the content of what they shared was interesting or relevant. Because it's not about content, it's about respect. When you let someone finish their story without redirecting to yours, you're saying, your experience matters. When you interrupt with your own version, you're saying, my experience matters more. And that comparison, that constant competition for attention, is exhausting. People start editing around you, keeping stories short because they know you're going to interrupt anyway, and eventually, they stop sharing altogether. Brain imaging shows something interesting about how we process other people's stories. When someone shares an experience, our mirror neurons activate. We're essentially simulating their experience in our own neural networks. This creates connection, empathy, understanding. But that process takes time. It requires us to stay focused on their narrative long enough for the simulation to complete. When you interrupt and redirect, you break that process. The connection never forms. Your brain jumps to its own simulation instead of completing theirs. So you feel like you related, but they feel like you dismissed them. There's also a status element here. High-status individuals in social hierarchies tend to talk more about themselves. They control conversation topics, redirect attention. This works when status is genuinely high because people defer to it. But when status is average or low, this behavior just looks desperate. You're performing dominance you don't actually have. And everyone can see the performance. Think about the last time someone made every conversation about themselves. Did you want to talk to them more or less? Did you respect their opinions? Trust their judgment? Probably not. Because someone who can't focus on anything except their own experience seems fundamentally self-absorbed. The fix requires discipline. When someone is talking, your job is to listen, not to prepare your response, not to search your memory for similar stories. Just listen. Let their experience complete before you add anything. And when you do add something, make it about them first. Ask a question. Reflect something back. Show that you actually processed what they said before moving on to what you want to say. How did that make you feel? Or, what happened next? Or, that sounds really difficult. These responses keep the focus where it belongs. On their story, their experience, their moment. Maybe later in the conversation, naturally, you share something similar, but it comes as addition, not replacement. As bridge, not hijack. Studies on conversation dynamics show that people who master this skill are rated as more emotionally intelligent, more trustworthy, and more worthy of leadership roles. Not because they share better stories, because they make space for other people's stories to breathe. There's a beautiful paradox here. The less you talk about yourself, the more interested people become in hearing about you. The more you let others speak, the more they value your words when you do speak, because you've demonstrated something rare. The ability to make someone else feel seen, heard, important, and that ability is magnetic. Most people walk through life feeling invisible, like their experiences don't matter, like nobody really cares about their stories. When you're the person who actually listens, who doesn't hijack, who lets them finish, you become precious to them. Not because you're entertaining, because you're respectful. So tomorrow, try this. In every conversation, let the other person finish completely before you say anything about yourself. Count to 2 after they stop talking. Make sure they're actually done. Then respond with a question or reflection before sharing your own experience. It'll feel unnatural. You'll want to jump in. Your story will feel urgent, relevant, important. Resist. Let them have their moment, their spotlight, their story. What you'll notice is that conversations deepen, people open up more, trust forms faster, and respect, that elusive thing you've been chasing by trying to impress everyone with your experiences, suddenly appears. Not because you talked more, because you listened better. And in a world where everyone is screaming for attention, the person who gives attention becomes the one everyone wants to be around. That's not a strategy. That's just being human in a way most people have forgotten how to be.